Hey, Chiney, how are you?
Hello. I'm good. How are you doing?
I am great. I'm so happy that we get to have this conversation. It's really interesting. You are a hero to so many young people, and when I hear heroes, I always start with my own family. So if someone says to me, Judith, who's your hero? Well, growing up, my hero was my grandfather. I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a man of incredible ideas. And so he would say things to me that when I was a kid, I thought were absurd. So he said once to me, he said, one day you're going to have a telephone that you can put in your pocket and carry everywhere. And this is like the 1970s when we still had dial-up telephones. And so I was 7. I was like,
sorry,
you're so silly.
What's
Exactly.
dial-up? Sorry.
A dial-up, right. You don't even remember dial-up. So exactly. But now that I'm older, like he was so forward thinking and he had all these ideas, but he was a Black man in the 60s, 70s, 80s and didn't get the opportunity or the investment to be able to do those things. But yet he put so much hope and dream and fortitude, I think, in me. So when I think about that question, I always start with my family. And I know you have an incredibly inspiring Nigerian family behind you. And I'd love if you would talk about your heroes too.
Yeah, I mean, I love that because those words like hope, opportunity, investment, those are all things that we should grow up with equal access to. But the reality is our season, the WNBA was in a bubble. Like you're in a bubble when you're in adolescence and then you go to the real world, whether it's college or after college, and that bubble bursts and you're like, oh snap, this is the real world that everyone's talking about. Usually it's when you get your first bill, right?
Right.
So I grew up in this house. I grew up in this household where we had a beautiful bubble in the sense that my parents were born and raised in Nigeria, but my 3 sisters and I were the first generation born and raised in the US. My parents could have gone back to Nigeria and started their own businesses, family businesses and stuff. But they just so happened to have the opportunity and a company, when it comes to my dad, that invested in him so that we build a life here. And so, growing up, my heroes were my family just because I had a great role model in my mom and my dad to look up to. And I think, how like growing up, your parents are like, you're scared of them, they're tough on you. And then the switch flips where you're like an adult, and you're like, oh my God, my parents are so cute. Like, I just want to be around you guys. You cook and clean. Like, what? Like you take for granted all those great things. And so I'm at the point where I'm starting to see my parents for what they actually are. And my dad, well, I mean, I've always known, but you know how that is. Yeah. My dad, we are from Nigeria, which is a very African country, extremely patriarchal countries, continent full of that type of mindset. For him to have 4 girls and never make us once feel like he needed a boy, which he was always challenged on. He always said, you guys can go and be whatever you want to be. And I'm like filtering myself because he's like, when people say, I'm going to my African, sorry. Don't you want a son? 4 girls, don't you want a son? And he's like, my boy, my girls will just sweep the floor with your sons. Like basically he never, ever questioned the power of us being girls. I didn't even know that was a thing until probably I played in the WNBA where like, well, you're not the NBA. I'm like, wait, hold up. What's this energy about? Like, so that's one side of it. I had an amazing girl dad that sort of told us all things are possible. And then I have a mom that he equally empowered. And my mom, who has started off as a special education teacher, and then now she just received her PhD in education about a year ago. And she's the assistant superintendent of one of the largest school districts in Texas. I had parents that were visionaries. They were ahead of their time when it comes to what they were conditioned to know in coming from Nigeria to now understanding that we can really have the best of both worlds. We can have the Nigerian determination to succeed coupled with the American opportunity, where we make the most of what our situation is.
So I think, there's certain values that our leaders have. And, I think about one you said, driving opportunity, generosity. Are there any other values that you can think about that you were inspired by your heroes or the folks that we've been talking about?
Yes, I would absolutely believe that, this idea of like self-determination, like we are at the intersection of so many different things, right? And, society might come out and where we were as a country, like certain people were not treated equally, even though it says all men are created equally, right? Even now we are 400 years removed from that, but we still have a long way to go. And so I think a lot of times, like, we feel like the system can work against us, but really it's that mindset of never being defeated and finding creative ways to still succeed. Because I always tell people, like, even just by existing in a space that was not built for you, that can be resistance. So hopefully people having that idea of self-determination, that I do have something valuable to contribute, despite what people might believe, is really important. And then I also think that, like, the reality is that we're just doing things differently nowadays, like being different, being unique. Like we are now realizing that we are absolutely more alike in our mindset, alike in our views and visions, than we are different. Like, you can look, it's funny, the guy I work with on ESPN, he looks the complete opposite of me. Anytime there's something that goes down, we are in lockstep alignment, because I think we're at this point where we're a part of this rising generation of people that realize, like, it's so simple, right and wrong, and how do we move forward and bring as many people along the way. So those values of doing things differently, valuing how you are different, and just like bringing that gang of people with you, like, to me is the energy that I really, really, really love now, of the present, of the now. Because for so long we've been like waiting, like, oh, don't worry, like, we're gonna wait on this to change. Nah, fam, like we need to find ways, like your small platform, not saying it's small, but like me, like my small platform, in my head it's small, but it matters, because it's the summation of all of our platforms working together that actually forces a change now, and not just wait for that change to happen later. So I think there's something really, really good happening right now in the midst of so much bad, that I hope that we get to cling on to for the future.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, I try to be hopeful in this space where, we could actually despair. I think it's really important to be hopeful. And one of the things that you said that really struck me is sometimes we end up showing up in spaces where people don't expect people who look like us to show up. And that's been, I mean, my experience in the corporate world. I get to go to some of these meetings. I remember the first time I went to the World Economic Forum, and I'm walking around the Congress Center, like counting the people that look like me. And there were not very many. And so you sort of say, and so when I went back the next year, I said, not only am I going to show up, but I'm going to host a dinner to bring together all the women that look like me, because my presence is resistance. And I think that's so important, what you said about you as a broadcaster. And you obviously have the background. I mean, you are a professional basketball player. That's often what we need when we want commentary on professional basketball players. So, I mean, that's pretty obvious to me.
How have you experienced that? Because I know every time you step into a room, it's sort of like people probably misinterpret why you're there. And what have you learned along the way of that process?
Well, I think it's just really important to be authentic and to show up as you are, and to be really clear about who you are, what you value, what you stand for. And another thing you said that was really striking is that your people come with you. And that we want to, I think about this idea that we want to lift as we climb. And that's really important. So it's not enough that I'm the only person in that space. My goal is that every time I go, I bring more people to that space. And so that's what I think I can contribute. And I think you just get used to being in that space sometimes. Another thing I want to think about is sometimes people say athletes shouldn't have a voice. We've heard that, where people have this critique, and Nerd Nation, you are a Stanford athlete, but even if you weren't a Stanford athlete, athletes are people who dedicate their lives to being excellent, right? And are experts at something. So when I look at it, I say, why wouldn't I assume that when an athlete speaks up, they bring that same dedication and excellence to anything that they are going to pursue? And so I wonder if you could comment on the, what is the role for athletes in our current discourse?
Well, I'm a proud member of the WNBA, where we are not new to this, but we are true to this, right? Okay. And also, one thing that I love about what you just said is that, this has been the biggest dilemma, because people want to say, and it's been put on the biggest of platforms, stick to sports. But that argument only works when it's convenient for what you want. What is the reality of what sports or athletes bring besides what you highlighted? Like, having this notion of being excellent and being the best player you can be, and winning, and sharing that feeling of winning with other people. I would say that this is not something that athletes are expected to do, but this is our responsibility, because the communities in which we are from, We are the exceptions, not the norm. Meaning, in our spaces, we are the exception, to our communities when we leave the arena of success. And we have to bear the responsibility of bringing as much success back to that community to create, other people's success. One thing that I love about the WNBA in particular is that we're a league full of amazing, badass, woke women, in the sense that, okay, the way you get into the WNBA, you need to be 3 years removed, I believe, from high school, or 3 years removed from being 18 years old, which means essentially you can go to the WNBA when you're after your junior year of college. How many people want to leave the degree when you're just at the finish line? Most of us go to our senior year, we get our degree, and then we go into the league. So you have a lot of educated women that understand what it's like to fight for respect in their communities, fight for respect in their, when it comes to our game. And now we're stepping into a place where we have a platform to help others. It's a no-brainer. You know what I mean? And so you have a league full of educated women that care for one another, are fighting for respect. And now we have a platform to speak on it. And people know us because usually we're the first, we're the onlys, we're the difference that exist in these spaces of success.
I've been so impressed with the commitment of the WNBA to collectively speak out, to individually speak out. And I just think about how great it is to have little girls who get to look up to girls like in the WNBA. It's how I feel about seeing, women running for office, especially running for highest office. And you and I both know David Jacoby, my brother-in-law. So you've probably met his little girls. And when I think about they get to grow up knowing that there are women like you, they get to grow up seeing that there are women running for political office. It gives me a lot of hope and excitement. And I wonder, what else makes you hopeful? We've got our role models and our examples, but what else makes you hopeful for the future?
What makes me hopeful is, I was worried for a second when that Generation Z, which, by the way, I can say this because I got 2 younger sisters that are a part of it. But now this next generation, I think, all jokes aside, they're doing things differently. This might be the first generation where they have a friend group with someone that looks different than what they look like. And now we're seeing the benefits of that. It's no longer going out and participating in a protest or going and posting a black box on your phone. It's now, how do you actually, in your small sphere of influence, do something about it? What are you going to do? Understanding that there are small things that can change, whether it's how you treat someone else, whether it's how you make a decision corporately, you know what, I'm going to open this hiring process to as many people possible and target people that I don't understand or I don't look like, and see the value of that perspective, because that perspective is something that you ignored, which actually could be a profitable perspective because you have ignored it. All these small things that people are doing, I grew up in Texas, and I know a lot of people that probably don't understand my experience, but having conversations with a lot of my friends that now are coming to realize it, to me, that's been special because all right, maybe it's not the whole scale. I get what you're saying, but it's at least we're having a conversation where they can look at situations a little bit differently. And so I guess the way I'd, sum it up, what keeps me optimistic is my mom always has this saying, small drops of water make a mighty ocean. So anytime I'm feeling down, I think of those small drops of water, those small things that are wins that I know are going to accumulate into something that is even bigger than what all of us even know.
I think that's pretty amazing. And I agree. I've seen what those small drops of water can do. And I think you said you show up and do what you can, make a plan, change what you can change seems to be really what we see folks in this generation doing. And I love the idea of a diverse group and thinking about having people from all backgrounds, all experiences, being the people that are going to be part of our organizations, going to be part of the change, part of the future. And that's definitely something that makes me really hopeful.
Even having a conversation with you right now means a lot because, another thing that I've always thought about, we work so hard, and a lot of times we feel like our work, is happening in darkness, in the sense that is anyone seeing the stuff I'm going through? Well, now I feel like we're at the point where a lot of that work is coming to light. So I commend you for all the great work you're doing.
Well, this has been great. Thank you very much. And thanks for contributing.